The wind at Timber Creek Station didn't just blow, it cut. Ruby Colton felt it slice through her threadbare coat as she stumbled off the train, Grace bundled tight against her chest. 12 years old, and she'd just watched her last parent die 3 states back. The platform crowd parted like she carried plague. "Name your guardian, girl." Station Master Pruitt's voice carried across the frozen planks. "Can't shelter you without one." Ruby's knees buckled. Grace whimpered, lips going blue in the lamplight. "Baby ain't even got a Christian name on the manifest," Mrs. Holt announced to anyone listening. "Mother probably wasn't married." 20 faces turned. Ruby's shame burned hotter than the cold. Then a shadow fell across them both, tall, broad-shouldered, spurs jingling with each step. The man crouched, slow, gray eyes meeting hers. "They're mine now." Station Master Pruitt stepped forward. "You can't just... watch me." 3 hours earlier, Nathaniel Ashford had no intention of becoming a father again. He stood at his ranch gate in the pre-dawn dark, breath fogging white as he counted cattle. 23 Herefords shifting in the near pasture, their bulk dark against snow. The cold bit through his leather gloves when he touched the iron latch. 15 below, maybe worse. A paper fluttered from the gatepost. Yellow, official. Nate's jaw tightened as he unfolded it. Territorial Bank. Mortgage payment $8,000 due May 1st, 1878. No extensions. He'd known it was coming. Didn't make the seeing any easier. Behind him, the ranch house stood solid. Stone and pine, built to outlast the man who'd raised him. His grandfather had claimed this land after the war with Mexico, died defending it from claim jumpers. Nate had inherited the deed and the debt both. The cattle lowed, restless. He folded the notice, tucked it in his coat. "Boss." His ranch hand, Miller, trudged through the snow from the bunkhouse. "Heard the train stuck down at Timber Creek, emergency stop. Something about orphans on board, no one to claim them." Nate grunted acknowledgement, not his concern. He had 16 weeks to scrape together $8,000, and spring roundup wouldn't start until the mud dried. Every day the weather held him back was money bleeding into frozen ground. "Might need supplies from town anyway," Miller added. "We're low on lamp oil." Nate looked west toward Timber Creek, 6 miles down the valley. The sky was lightening to that particular gray that promised more snow. He should stay, work the forge, fix the plow blade that had cracked last week. But something pulled at him, maybe just the need to move, to do something other than count money he didn't have. "Saddle Chester," he said. The station platform was chaos when he arrived. Steam hissing from the stalled train, passengers huddled in groups, and a crowd gathered around something near the far end. Nate dismounted, his spurs catching lamplight as he walked. Their jingle bob pattern was distinctive, a sound he'd grown so used to he barely heard it anymore. Then he saw her, a girl, maybe 12, kneeling on the ice-slicked boards. She held an infant against her chest, both of them shaking, though whether from cold or fear, Nate couldn't say. The baby's cry was thin, weak, wrong. "I said name your guardian," Station Master Pruitt loomed over them, arms crossed. "Rules are rules, girl. No guardian, no shelter." "Papa was supposed to meet us," the girl's voice barely carried. He's late. Your papa's dead 3 weeks now." Mrs. Holt, the station master's wife, stood with 2 other women, voices pitched to Carrie. "Telegram came yesterday, and that baby," she leaned closer to her companions, "ain't even got a Christian name on the manifest. Mother probably wasn't married." The crowd shifted, whispers spreading like sparks in dry grass. Nate watched the girl's face flush red despite the cold, watched her try to stand and fail, legs giving out beneath her, the baby's cry cut off, silence worse than sound. Something in Nate's chest cracked open, the same place that had sealed shut 5 years ago when they'd buried his son. James had been 3. Too young, too small for the grave they'd dug. He didn't think, just moved. His shadow fell across the girl first. She flinched, tried to curl tighter around the infant. Nate crouched slow, knees protesting, and then met her eyes. Brown, wide, terrified, but steady underneath. This girl had grit. "They're mine now," what he said. The words came out gravel rough, louder than he'd intended. The crowd went quiet. "You can't just..." Pruitt started. "Watch me." Nate stood, scooped the girl up with one arm. She weighed nothing, all bones and ragged wool, and cradled the baby's bundled form against his chest with the other. The infant stirred at the warmth, let out a shuddering breath. Alive. Still alive. He turned toward his horse, crowd parting without him asking. Chester stood patient, used to strange cargo. Nate settled the girl in the saddle, handed her the baby, then mounted behind them both. His coat was heavy sheepskin and fur. He opened it, wrapped it around them like a tent. "Mark my words," Mrs. Holt's voice carried as he turned Chester toward home. "That man's got ulterior motives. Rich widower don't just adopt street waifs." The girl stiffened against him. Nate felt her hand close around something at her throat, a silver locket, half hidden beneath her collar. She clutched it like a lifeline, wouldn't let go even to hold the baby better. He didn't ask about it. Some griefs needed keeping. They rode into the dark, snow beginning to fall soft and steady. The girl didn't speak. The baby's breathing evened out, warming against them both. 6 miles from town, Nate felt the girl finally relax, exhaustion winning over fear. "Why'd you help us?" she whispered. The question hung in the cold air. Nate's throat tightened, the words he couldn't say pressing against his teeth. "Because I had a son once. Because I failed him. Because maybe this time I can get it right." "Had family," he said instead. Left it at that. The girl nodded against his chest, said nothing more. Behind them, unseen in the dark, Miller the ranch hand watched from the tree line. He'd followed at a distance, curious. Now he turned his horse back toward town, toward the saloon where Vernon Colton, executor of the recently deceased Colton estate, was known to drink his evenings away. News like this was worth a silver dollar, maybe two. The ranch house smelled like wood smoke and coffee when they arrived. Hannah, Nate's housekeeper, took one look at the children and moved with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire higher, heating milk in a pan, pulling blankets from the cedar chest. Ruby stood just inside the door, uncertain. The baby, Grace, she kept wanting to say the name, but the station master's words echoed, "Ain't even got a Christian name," stirred in her arms, tiny face scrunching. "Set her there by the fire." Hannah pointed to a rocking chair, its wood worn smooth with age. "Child needs warming before feeding." Ruby obeyed, lowering herself carefully. The chair creaked. Grace's whimper rose to a cry, thin, reedy, the sound of a baby who'd been crying too long already. Nate appeared with a cradle, setting it near the hearth without ceremony. He didn't look at Ruby, just placed it and left, his boots heavy on the floorboards. "Belonged to his son," Hannah said quietly, handing Ruby a cup of warm milk. "Help her drink slow. Too fast, and she'll just bring it back up." Ruby's hands shook as she took it. The warmth seeped through the tin cup, almost painful against her frozen fingers. She coaxed Grace's lips open, let drops fall on the baby's tongue. Grace sputtered, then latched on desperate. "Easy now." Hannah steadied Ruby's grip. "You're doing fine, child." But Ruby wasn't fine. She was sitting in a stranger's house, wearing a dead woman's clothes. Hannah had produced a dress while the milk heated. Simple brown wool that smelled of cedar and lavender, with a baby who had no legal name and a mother buried 3 states back in a pauper's grave. Her throat closed up. She focused on Grace's small, urgent sounds as she drank. Nate returned carrying folded quilts. He still hadn't met Ruby's eyes directly. "Guest room's made up. You'll sleep there tonight." "Sir, Ruby's voice cracked. "Thank you for helping us." He paused mid-step, back to her. "Had a son once." The words hung there, heavy. Ruby waited for more, but Nate just set the quilts on the chair arm and walked out, his spurs jingling with each step, a distinctive pattern, different from any she'd heard before. Hannah touched her shoulder. "Lost his boy to cholera, 5 years back. Wife too, month before that. Nathaniel ain't been the same since." Ruby nodded, throat too tight to speak. She understood loss. Grace finished the milk, eyes already closing. Ruby shifted her to the cradle, tucking the blankets around her with careful hands. The baby's breathing deepened, steadied. For the first time in 3 weeks, Ruby let herself hope they might survive this. The hope lasted 2 days. Ruby woke the 3rd morning to voices downstairs, Nate's low rumble and another man's, sharper. She dressed quick, feet silent on the stairs. "Executor of my brother's estate." The stranger stood in the main room, expensive coat dusted with road dirt, a leather satchel at his feet. "Which makes those children my legal responsibility." Uncle Vernon. Ruby's stomach dropped. Nate stood between Vernon and the stairs, arms crossed. "Children are settled here." "Settled?" Vernon's laugh had edges. "You've had them 3 days, Ashford. I'm blood family. Law's on my side." "The law?" A new voice, older, measured. Reverend Caldwell stepped through the door, snow on his shoulders. "Perhaps we should discuss what the law actually says, Vernon." Vernon's jaw tightened. Reverend. Didn't realize this was a church matter. Any matter involving orphan children concerns the church. Caldwell moved to the fire, warming his hands. The smell of wood smoke thickened, especially when questions of guardianship arise. Ruby crept down 3 more steps, just enough to see. Grace was still asleep upstairs, blessedly quiet. My brother died December 28th. Vernon pulled papers from his satchel. I'm named executor. That gives me authority over his children and his estate. Estate? Nate's voice went flat. You mean the 40 acres they homesteaded? Among other things. Vernon smiled thin. Point is, I'm their legal guardian until they come of age. You're a kind man, Ashford, but this is family business. Reverend Caldwell cleared his throat. There's a complication, Vernon. The infant, Grace, I believe Mrs. Colton intended to call her, isn't in the baptismal registry. Silence. Ruby's hand found her mother's locket, pressed it hard against her chest. So, Vernon said finally, so without a Christian name officially recorded, she has no legal identity in the territory. Caldwell's voice stayed gentle, but Ruby heard the weight beneath. Can't inherit, can't be formally claimed as heir. Legally speaking, she doesn't exist. Vernon's expression shifted, calculation replacing annoyance. Then I suppose we'll need to rectify that. As her guardian, I can consent to baptism. True, Caldwell paused. But territorial law requires the guardian to be recognized first, which requires the child to have legal standing, which requires baptism. It's a circle, Nate finished, voice tight. Indeed, Caldwell looked between them. I cannot baptize a child without parental or legal guardian consent. Vernon cannot be recognized as legal guardian of a child who doesn't legally exist, and the child cannot exist without baptism. Ruby's breath stopped. She felt the trap closing, though she didn't fully understand it yet. Vernon's smile returned, colder now. How unfortunate. I suppose that means the girl, Ruby, is my only legal ward. He looked up the stairs, straight at her. Hello, niece. Time to come home. She's not going anywhere. Nate moved toward the stairs. Blood trumps charity, Ashford. Vernon's hand went to his coat pocket, rested there. And if you try to keep her, I'll have Sheriff Masterson here by nightfall. You want to explain to him why you're harboring a minor against her family's wishes? Ruby's knees went weak. She sat hard on the step, the wood creaking loud in the sudden quiet. Vernon tilted his head, studying her. Don't worry, child. I'll take good care of you. And the baby, well, his shrug said everything. Can't take care of someone who doesn't exist, can you? The cold from the open door reached all the way up the stairs, sank into Ruby's bones. Grace chose that moment to cry, thin, needful, alive. Vernon collected his papers, tucked them away. I'll return tomorrow with proper documentation. Have them ready, Ashford. Both of them. He left, door slamming behind him. Ruby couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Grace's crying rose higher. Nate stood frozen, staring at the closed door. Finally, Reverend Caldwell spoke. There might be a way, an ecclesiastical exception I need to research, but Nathaniel... He waited until Nate looked at him. It won't be easy, and it won't be fast. How long? Judge Pierce arrives for spring circuit in 6 weeks. That's our deadline. 6 weeks. Ruby pressed the locket harder, felt its metal bite her palm. Upstairs, Grace screamed for someone to come. Ruby found herself at Freeman's Forge 3 days later, sent by Hannah to fetch a repaired harness buckle. The blacksmith shop stood at the edge of town, smoke rising steady from its chimney. She pushed open the door, and heat washed over her, thick, almost alive. Isaiah Freeman looked up from his anvil. Hammer paused mid-strike. He was older than Nate, maybe 60, with gray threading his close-cropped hair and scars mapping both forearms. His eyes were sharp, kind. Miss Ruby. He set the hammer down, 3 precise taps against the anvil's face. Tap, tap, tap. Hannah said you'd be coming. Buckle's ready. Ruby nodded, stayed near the door. The forge's red glow lit the shop, and the smell of hot iron filled her nose. Metallic, raw. Isaiah wiped his hands on his leather apron, moved to a workbench. Ruby's eyes drifted across the tools hanging on the wall, landed on a small writing desk in the corner. Papers scattered across it, ink bottle open. An idea sparked, dangerous and desperate. Mr. Freeman? She kept her voice small. Would you have paper I could borrow? Just 1 sheet? He studied her a moment. What for? Letter. To my aunt back east. The lie came easy, necessary. Isaiah handed her the buckle first. then pulled a clean sheet from the desk drawer. Ink and pen are there. Take your time. Ruby waited until he returned to the forge, until the hammer strikes resumed their rhythm. Then she pulled her mother's diary page from her pocket, the one she'd found tucked in the locket's hidden compartment, the one that said, "Name her Grace Nathaniel," after the good rancher at Fort Laramie who helped us. Her mother's handwriting, familiar and aching. Ruby studied the letters, the way they looped and slanted. She dipped the pen, held it over the blank paper. Reverend Caldwell needed parental consent to baptize Grace. A signature was just ink on paper, just marks anyone could make if they wouldn't do that if I were you. Isaiah's voice, quiet behind her. Ruby jerked, pen skittering across the page. He stood 3 feet back, arms crossed, face unreadable. Whatever you're thinking, child, don't. Ruby's eyes burned. You don't understand. Uncle Vernon won't consent. The Reverend won't baptize without consent. Grace won't exist. She'll just disappear, like she was never born. I know. Isaiah moved closer, his shadow falling across the ruined paper. Heard about your situation. Whole town's heard. Then you know I have to do something. Ruby's voice cracked. Not that. Isaiah took the pen from her hand, gentle but firm, capped the ink bottle. A lie told for love is still a lie, Ruby, and lies have a way of revealing themselves. He gestured to the forge. Come here. Want to show you something. Ruby followed, reluctant. Isaiah pulled a horseshoe from the coals, held it up with iron tongs. The metal glowed orange-red, pulsing with heat. See this? He set it on the anvil. Good iron, properly forged. Watch. He struck it once, twice. The third strike rang out clear and true, the metal holding its shape. Truth stands up under fire. Now. He pulled another piece, similar size and shape. This one's got flaws, hidden cracks where the smith rushed his work. He struck once, twice. The third strike, and the metal split clean through, fragments spinning across the floor. Third strike tells truth, Isaiah said, meeting her eyes. Always does. Fire, don't flatter, child. It just reveals what was there all along. Ruby stared at the broken metal. Her throat closed up. I know you're scared. Isaiah's voice softened. I know you want to protect your sister, but the moment you forge that signature, you become no better than the folks trying to take her from you. You become someone who uses paper and lies to get what they want. He paused. That who you want to be? Ruby shook her head, tears finally spilling over. Isaiah handed her a rag, clean, folded. There's other ways, legal ways. Reverend Caldwell's a smart man. He'll find a path. What if he doesn't? Ruby wiped her eyes, the rag smelling of coal dust and honest sweat. Then we'll find another. Isaiah squeezed her shoulder once. But we do it right, you hear me? Ruby nodded, throat too tight for words. Reverend Caldwell arrived at the ranch that evening, snow dusting his coat, eyes bright with something Ruby couldn't name. Found it. He set a leather-bound book on Nate's table, church law, pages yellowed with age. Baptism of necessity, emergency doctrine dating back centuries. Nate leaned forward. Meaning? Meaning, if a child's life is in immediate mortal danger. Caldwell's finger traced the Latin text. Any Christian can perform emergency baptism without parental consent, and if I, as ordained clergy, witness such danger and perform the baptism, it carries full legal weight. Ruby felt hope flare, painful in its intensity. So if Grace's life were threatened, yes, I could baptize her on the spot. Caldwell closed the book slowly. But I cannot, will not, fabricate such danger. The law exists for genuine emergencies. Using it as legal subterfuge would make me complicit in fraud. The hope died. Ruby's shoulders sagged. However, Caldwell's voice shifted, careful. We live in Wyoming territory. The land itself is dangerous. Accidents happen, rivers flood, winter storms strike without warning. If such natural danger arose and I happened to be present, you'd perform the baptism, Nate finished. I would fulfill my sacred duty, Caldwell corrected, but I will not create the danger. God's watching, gentlemen, and so is my conscience. Nate stood, moved to the window. The snow fell heavier now, wind picking up. So we wait, hope for disaster. We pray, Caldwell said quietly, for God's timing, not ours. Ruby clutched her mother's locket, the metal warm from her skin. 6 weeks until the judge arrived. 6 weeks for Grace to somehow be in mortal danger without anyone causing it. 6 weeks to hope for a miracle she couldn't pray for without hating herself. Outside, the wind howled. The ranch hand Miller rode past the window, headed toward town, toward the saloon where Vernon Colton drank, toward news worth selling. Ruby needed thread. Hannah had sent her to the general store with a list and $3 silver, more money than Ruby had ever carried. She pushed through the door, bell jangling, warmth and lamp oil smell washing over her. Mrs. Holt stood behind the counter, arranging bolts of fabric. Her eyes flickered to Ruby, mouth tightening. "Help you." Cool, but not outright hostile. "Thread, please, white and brown." Ruby kept her voice steady, set the list on the counter. Mrs. Holt pulled the spools without comment. Ruby waited, aware of other women in the store. 3 of them clustered near the pickle barrel, voices pitched to Carrie, saying he's got $8,000 in debt to the Territorial Bank. Convenient, isn't it? Orphans show up, probably got inheritance money. Do the math, Martha. Man's desperate. Ruby's face burned. She stared at the counter, willing herself invisible. Mrs. Holt rang up the thread, counted change. Her movements were mechanical, expression unreadable. Ruby took her purchases, turned for the door. "Child," she stopped. Mrs. Holt's voice was quieter now, meant for Ruby alone. "Don't listen to gossip. It's got a way of poisoning everything it touches." Ruby nodded once, fled into the cold. The snow had turned to sleet, stinging her cheeks. She clutched the paper-wrapped package, started toward the hitching post where Nate had left the wagon. Her boot caught ice. She went down hard, packages scattering. The locket chain snapped, and she watched in horror as it skittered across the frozen mud, disappearing beneath the boardwalk. "No!" Ruby scrambled forward on hands and knees, fingers scraping wood. The locket was just out of reach, caught in shadow. She stretched farther. Her fingers brushed metal, but it slipped deeper into the dark space beneath. Tears came hot and furious. Everything, every piece of her mother, gone or breaking or slipping away. "Ruby," Nate's voice. His boots appeared in her vision. Then he was crouching beside her. He didn't ask, just reached under the boardwalk with his longer arm, retrieved the locket. The chain was broken, but the locket itself was intact. He pressed it into her palm. Ruby curled around it, shoulders shaking. "Heard them," she managed. "In the store. They think you're using us for money." Nate gathered the scattered packages, silent. Then, "Let's go home." The wagon ride back was quiet except for sleet tapping the canvas cover. Ruby held the locket tight, chain wrapped around her fingers. "Is it true?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "About the debt?" "Yes." Simple, honest. Ruby's chest tightened. "I don't have money," she said. "Mama and Papa, we didn't have anything, just the homestead claim." "I know." "Then why?" "Because." Nate's jaw worked. "Some things matter more than money." Ruby wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. They reached the ranch as dusk fell. Isaiah Freeman's horse stood at the hitching post, the blacksmith himself on the porch talking with Reverend Caldwell. Both men looked grim. "Nathaniel," Isaiah's voice carried warning. "We got trouble." They went inside. Ruby followed, still clutching the broken locket. Grace slept in her cradle near the fire, oblivious. Vernon Colton sat in Nate's chair. "Didn't invite you in," Nate said, voice flat. "Didn't need an invitation." Vernon stood, pulled a document from his coat. "Brought something interesting to show you all, my brother's last will and testament. Found it among his effects yesterday." Caldwell took the paper, read silently. His face went carefully blank. "What's it say?" Nate asked. "It names Vernon as guardian of both children." Caldwell's voice was measured, pastoral, and it transfers ownership of the homestead claim to Vernon as compensation for assuming care of the orphans. Ruby's world tilted. "No, Mama would never. Papa wouldn't. Your parents were dying, child." Vernon's voice carried false sympathy. "They knew they couldn't care for you. They made provisions." He looked at Nate. "Legal provisions, signed and witnessed." Isaiah moved closer to the fire, squinting at the document over Caldwell's shoulder. "When was this signed?" "December 15th, 2 weeks before my brother passed." "Convenient timing," Isaiah murmured. Vernon's eyes narrowed. "You calling me a liar, Freeman?" "Calling it convenient." Isaiah's finger traced something on the paper. "That's all I'm saying." The room went tense. Ruby watched Nate's hands curl into fists, then deliberately relax. "I'll need to verify this with Judge Pierce." Caldwell said carefully. When he arrives in 6 weeks, I know, Vernon smiled. Plenty of time for you all to accept reality. The children are mine by law, blood and paper both. He moved toward the door, paused. I'll be generous, Ashford. Keep them until the judge rules, but after that, he shrugged. Well, law's the law. The door closed behind him. Nobody moved. Finally, Isaiah spoke. That document's wrong. How do you know? Nate's voice was raw. Ink's too black. Isaiah's jaw set. Iron gall ink browns with age. That paper's supposedly 4 months old. Ink should be russet by now. That ink's fresh, 2 weeks at most. Caldwell examined the paper again, closer. He's right. But proving forgery... Fire reveals truth, Isaiah said. Same as metal, different test, same principle. Ruby didn't understand, but she heard the certainty in his voice. 6 weeks, Nate said quietly. We've got 6 weeks to prove fraud, get Grace legally named, and keep Vernon from taking either of them. Or, Caldwell added gently, we accept that the law might not be on our side, that sometimes the righteous lose. Silence stretched. Grace stirred in her sleep, small fist escaping the blanket. Ruby stood abruptly. No. They all looked at her. She repeated, stronger now. Mama wrote Grace's name in her diary, wrote it before she died, said to name her Grace Nathaniel, after you, Mr. Ashford, after you helped them at Fort Laramie. Nate's face went white. Fort Laramie, summer of 77. There was a woman, pregnant, heat stroke. I gave her water, helped her to shade. That was Mama. Ruby pulled the diary page from her pocket, hands shaking. She remembered you. Wanted Grace named after you. That has to mean something. Caldwell took the page, read slowly. His eyes grew bright. It means your mother's intent is documented. Not legal in itself, but, he looked at Nate. It means she trusted you, before any of this started. That's not nothing. Isaiah nodded slowly. Man saves a woman's life. Woman wants her daughter named after him. Year later, that man takes the daughter in. He smiled thin. That's not greed. That's debt being paid. But Ruby heard what they didn't say. Intention wasn't law. Diary pages weren't baptismal records. Hope wasn't salvation. Outside, the sleet turned back to snow. The temperature was dropping, but somewhere upstream, winter's grip was loosening. The ice dam on Clearwater Creek groaned in the dark, swelling with melt from the false spring thaw. Nobody heard it yet. Nate rode to town before dawn, saddlebags heavy with the ranch ledger. The bank opened at 8. He was there at 7:30, waiting on the steps while frost crept up the windows. By 9 o'clock, he'd sold 200 head of cattle to a buyer headed for Cheyenne. Early sale, bad price. He'd lose $1,200 against what spring would bring. But the cash was immediate, and that's what mattered. He walked straight to the general store after, asked Mrs. Holt for paper and pen. Writing a letter? She asked. Receipt. He wrote it out, careful, numbers clear, dated and signed. Paid in full, mortgage debt $8,000, cleared March 3rd, 1878. Then he walked back to the bank, had the manager countersign it. By noon, the receipt was posted on the general store's community board, where anyone could see. No debt, no motive. Ruby found him in the barn that evening, mucking stalls. The smell of hay and horse sweat was thick, comfortable. She stood in the doorway, the posted receipt crumpled in her hand. You didn't have to do that. Nate drove the pitchfork into fresh straw, turned to face her. Yes, I did. But the money, $1,200 lost. Man's word ain't worth spit if he can't back it with action. He pulled off his gloves, hung them on a nail. Folks were talking, needed them to stop. Ruby's throat tightened. They'll find something else to say. Probably. Nate moved past her toward the house. But they can't say I'm keeping you for your inheritance, 'cause now everyone knows there ain't enough inheritance to matter. She followed him inside. Grace was awake in Hannah's arms, fussing quietly. The baby had been restless all week, teeth coming in, Hannah said. Ruby took Grace, settled into the rocking chair by the fire. The baby's weight was familiar now, solid and real. She'd gotten heavier these past weeks, cheeks filling out. Mr. Ashford? Ruby kept her voice low. Can I ask you something? Nate poured coffee, waited. When Mama wrote about you in her diary, Fort Laramie, do you really remember her? He was quiet for a long moment. Steam rose from his cup, curling in the lamplight. Woman with a good smile, he said finally. Traveling with a man who looked half dead already. She was 7, 8 months along, collapsed near the water pump. I was passing through, buying supplies. He paused. Gave her water. Helped her to the doctor's office. She thanked me, said if the baby was a boy, she'd name him after me. Laughed about it. Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. She had the baby 2 months later. Girl, not a boy. But she remembered you anyway. Seems so. Grace shifted against Ruby's chest, small hand finding the broken locket chain. Ruby had wrapped it temporary with thread, wore it anyway. I need to open it, she said suddenly. The locket. There's more inside. I can feel it moving, but I've been scared to look. Why scared? Because it's the last piece of her. Once I open it, that's all there is. Nate set his coffee down, crossed the room. He crouched beside the rocking chair, eye level with Ruby. Open it. Ruby's hands shook as she worked the clasp. It stuck, then gave. Inside, 2 tintypes, mother and father young and smiling, and beneath them folded paper. Another diary page. Ruby unfolded it careful. Her mother's handwriting, dated December 20th, 8 days before she died. The cough is worse. Samuel's gone already, I can see it in his eyes. If I don't survive birth, Ruby must know. Grace Nathaniel Colton, that's her name. After the rancher who showed kindness when we had nothing. If this baby lives and I don't, I pray she finds him again. He had the look of a man who'd lost children. Maybe God will give him another chance. Ruby couldn't breathe. The words blurred. Nate read over her shoulder, silent. When he finished, he stood abruptly, walked to the window. His shoulders were rigid, hands braced against the sill. She knew, Ruby whispered. Mama knew she was dying, and she still wanted... Her voice broke. Hannah took the paper gently, read it herself. Her eyes grew wet. This is Providence, child. Plain Providence. But Ruby heard the unspoken truth. Providence wasn't law. A mother's dying wish, written in private, witnessed by no one. It held no weight in territorial court. Still, it meant something, had to mean something. Nate turned from the window, his face composed again. Tomorrow, I'm taking that to Reverend Caldwell. It's evidence of intent. Not legal consent, but... He paused. It's something. Ruby nodded, carefully refolded the page. Grace had fallen asleep against her shoulder, breathing soft and even. Outside, the night was clear for the first time in weeks. Stars visible, sharp and cold. The temperature hovered just above freezing, warm enough for the fall spring to continue, cold enough that the ice dam upstream held. Barely. Miller the ranch hand rode past the window again, headed toward town. 3rd time this week. Nate watched him go, jaw tight. That man's talking, Hannah said quietly. I know. Vernon's paying him. I know that too. Ruby looked between them. What's he telling Vernon? Everything, Nate said. Every word we speak, every plan we make. He met Ruby's eyes. Which means Vernon knows about the diary page now, and he'll be ready. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Grace sighed in her sleep, small and trusting, and utterly unaware that 4 adults were fighting a war over whether she legally existed. Ruby pressed the locket against her heart, felt its broken chain bite her palm. Grace Nathaniel Colton, her mother's last gift. A name, and a prayer, and a hope that somehow, impossibly, they'd find their way home. The weather shifted overnight. Ruby woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves, steady, insistent. She dressed quickly, went to the window. The snow was melting, fast. Mud showed through in dark patches across the yard. False spring, Hannah called it that over breakfast. Voice worried. Temperature'll drop again, always does, but the damage is done upstream. Nate said nothing, just drank his coffee and stared at nothing. Ruby didn't understand until Miller came running from the north pasture, horse-lathered. Ice dam's swelling, he gasped. Heard it groaning from a mile off. When she blows... Clearwater Creek floods, Nate finished. How long? Day, maybe 2, depends on the temperature. Nate stood, already moving. Get the cattle to high ground. Everything loose in the barn gets moved upstairs. Ruby, he turned to her. Keep Grace inside. Don't go near the creek. But Ruby's mind was already turning. Clearwater Creek ran behind the church. The baptismal platform where Reverend Caldwell performed Sunday services sat right at the water's edge. If the ice dam broke... Mr. Ashford, her voice came out too loud. Sunday service. The creek... His eyes met hers. Understanding flashed between them, followed immediately by something darker. "No," he said quietly. "But if—" "No," firmer now. "We don't put that baby in danger. Not for any reason." Ruby wanted to argue, wanted to point out that this was the chance, the only chance, the emergency baptism they needed. But the look on Nate's face stopped her. "We don't become what we're fighting," he said. "You understand me?" She nodded, throat tight. Reverend Caldwell arrived that afternoon, his face drawn. "Heard about the dam? I've canceled Sunday service?" "Good," Nate said. "But—" Caldwell hesitated. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. If natural disaster were to occur, and if I were present as a witness—" "Don't," Nate's voice cut sharp. "Don't make this into something it's not." "I'm not suggesting we create danger, Nathaniel. I'm saying if danger presents itself, then we pray for real danger." Nate's jaw worked. "And hate ourselves for it. That what you want?" Caldwell looked at Ruby, still holding Grace. "I want that child to have a name, a life, legal protection. Not like this." The words hung heavy. Ruby felt the weight of them, the terrible choice nobody wanted to make. Isaiah arrived as evening fell, his forge closed for once. He sat at the table with Nate, Caldwell, and Hannah, while Ruby listened from the rocking chair. "I've been thinking about Vernon's will," Isaiah said. "The ink, the wax seal, axe. If we could test it—" "How?" Caldwell asked. Isaiah's fingers drummed the table. 3 taps, rhythm like his hammer. "Heat, same principle as metal. Real period wax, beeswax mixed with pine resin, has a high melting point. Hardens when you heat it slow, but modern paraffin—" He paused. "That's been commercially available since '67, but it's expensive out here, rare, and it melts easy." Nate leaned forward. "You're saying if Vernon's seal melts, then he used modern wax, which means the document's recent, not 4 months old like he claims." Isaiah's smile was grim. "Fire reveals truth." "We'd need the document," Caldwell said. "Vernon won't hand it over willingly." "Judge Pierce can compel it," Isaiah countered. "When he arrives, if we request an evidentiary hearing." Hope flickered in Ruby's chest, small, fragile, but real. 4 weeks until the judge comes," Nate said. "We can hold out 4 weeks." Outside, the ice dam groaned, low, ominous. The sound carried across the valley like distant thunder. Ruby held Grace tighter. Sunday came anyway, service canceled, but the day still holy. Ruby sat on the porch with Grace, watching the creek swell. The water ran brown with silt, rising inch by inch. Miller rode past again, 4th time that week. He didn't look at the house. "That man's a snake," Hannah muttered from the doorway. Ruby agreed, but said nothing. Grace was fussy, fighting sleep. Her gums were swollen, 2 bottom teeth just breaking through. "She's teething hard," Hannah observed. "Hurts, poor mite. Here." She brought a wet cloth, cool from the pump. "Let her chew on this." Grace latched onto it gratefully, small whimpers quieting. The afternoon stretched long and strange. Too warm for March, the mud thick and treacherous. Nate worked in the barn, reinforcing the upper level. Isaiah came and went, checking the creek's rise. By evening, the water was 2 feet higher than normal. "She'll blow tomorrow," Isaiah said, voice certain. "Maybe tonight, if the temperature holds." Nate nodded, face carved from stone. That night, Ruby couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, Grace in the cradle beside her bed, and listened to the creek's roar growing louder. Downstairs, voices murmured. Nate and Hannah, talking low. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Hannah's voice drifted up. "I'm trying not to." "But if the Reverend were there—" "Hannah," Nate's voice carried warning. "We're not doing this. I'm just saying the Lord provides, not like this, not ever like this." Silence. Then Hannah, softer. "That baby deserves a name, Nathaniel." "I know, but not at the cost of my soul." Ruby pressed her face into the pillow, torn between hope and horror. She wanted Grace named, wanted it with every fiber of her being, but the price. Grace whimpered in her sleep. Ruby reached down, touched her small hand. The baby's fingers curled around hers, holding tight even in dreams. "I won't let them take you," Ruby whispered. "Legal or not, name or not, you're mine. You're ours." Outside, the ice dam groaned war louder. And upstream, in the dark, a crack appeared, thin as spider silk, but growing. The boardwalk behind the church had rotted through in 3 places. Nobody had noticed yet. Nobody was looking. Tomorrow was Monday. The creek would flood, the boardwalk would collapse, and God alone knew what would happen after that. The town meeting was Hannah's idea, though she claimed later it was Mrs. Holt who'd suggested it. Either way, by Monday afternoon, half of Timber Creek had gathered in the church, the only building large enough to hold them all. Ruby sat in the back with Grace, trying to stay invisible. Nate stood near the front, arms crossed, face unreadable. Isaiah and Reverend Caldwell flanked him like sentries. Vernon Colton sat in the front pew, Lawyer Simmons beside him, both dressed in Eastern suits that looked out of place against the rough-hewn walls. "We're here to discuss the Colton children," Mayor Pritchard began, voice carrying over the murmur. "Specifically, the question of guardianship. Vernon Colton claims blood right. Nathaniel Ashford claims—" He paused, uncertain. "Well, what do you claim, Ashford?" "Nothing." Nate's voice was flat. "Just that the children are safe with me." "Safe isn't legal," Vernon cut in smoothly. "The law is clear. I'm their uncle, named executor of my brother's estate. Blood trumps charity." "Blood that didn't show up for 3 weeks," Isaiah said from the side. "Where were you when they were freezing on the station platform?" Vernon's jaw tightened. "I came as soon as I received word." "Funny how that word came right after you heard about the homestead deed." The crowd stirred. Vernon stood, facing Isaiah directly. "You accusing me of something, Freeman?" "Just noting the timing." "Gentlemen," Pritchard raised his hands, "we're here for discussion, not accusation." He looked around the room. "I propose we hear from the community. Those who support Mr. Colton's claim, speak now." A hand rose. The banker, holding Nate's old mortgage. "Vernon Colton has means and family connection. That's what the law requires." Another hand, a rancher from the South Valley. "Law's law. Can't just ignore blood rights because we like Ashford better." Mrs. Simmons, the lawyer's wife, stood. "The baby isn't even baptized. She has no legal standing. How can she be claimed by anyone?" Ruby's face burned. She held Grace tighter, the baby mercifully quiet against her chest. "Now those who support Mr. Ashford." Isaiah stood first. "I've known Nathaniel 15 years. He's a good man. Better than most." Hannah rose next. "Those children have thrived under his care. The baby's gained weight, the girl's learning to read proper. You can see it with your eyes." Doc Hayes, the traveling physician, cleared his throat. "I examined the infant last week. She's healthy, well-fed, developing normally. That speaks to quality of care." But Ruby watched the faces around the room. For every supporter, there were 2 uncertain, 3 skeptical. The room was splitting down the middle. Vernon sensed it too. He stood, voice pitched for maximum effect. "I appreciate Mr. Ashford's kindness. Truly. But kindness doesn't supersede law. My brother trusted me with his children's future. That trust is documented, witnessed, and legal." He pulled the will from his pocket, held it high. "This is what matters. Not sentiment, not charity, law." The crowd murmured agreement. Ruby felt hope crumbling. Mayor Pritchard sighed. "Seems we're at an impasse. Judge Pierce arrives in 3 weeks. Until then..." The church door slammed open. Miller, the ranch hand, stood in the doorway, breathing hard. "Creek's breached. Ice dam broke upstream. Water's coming fast." Chaos erupted. People pushed toward the door, voices rising in panic. The church sat on high ground, but homes and businesses downstream. "Everyone to the high side of town," Pritchard shouted. "Help your neighbors. Move." The crowd dispersed like startled birds. Ruby stood, clutching Grace, swept up in the surge toward the door. Nate appeared beside her, hand on her shoulder. "Stay close." They spilled out into afternoon light. Ruby could hear it now, the roar of water, growing louder. Down the hill, Clearwater Creek had transformed into a churning brown torrent, swallowing its banks. The boardwalk behind the church, the one Miller had warned about, stood directly in the flood's path. "Dear God," Reverend Caldwell breathed. "The baptismal platform." It was already half submerged, wood groaning under the pressure. Ruby's mind raced. This was it, the emergency they needed. But Grace was safe in her arms, nowhere near danger, and Nate's words echoed, "We don't become what we're fighting." Then Grace squirmed, reaching toward the water with baby fascination. Ruby's grip loosened for just a second. Grace lunged. Ruby grabbed, but the baby was slippery, determined. Her small body twisted, and Ruby's foot hit mud, and suddenly she was falling, Grace flying from her arms. The baby landed on the boardwalk edge, rolled once, twice, toward the gap where rotted planks had given way. Ruby screamed. Nate was already running, his spurs throwing mud. He hit the boardwalk at full speed, wood cracking under his weight. Grace reached the gap, small body tipping. Nate's hand shot out, caught her ankle. He yanked her back just as the board beneath him splintered. He went into the water. Ruby couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Just watched as Nate surfaced, Grace clutched against his chest, fighting the current that tried to drag them both downstream. Isaiah was there, rope in hand. Where had he gotten rope? Throwing the end toward Nate. It fell short. He hauled it back, threw again. Nate caught it one-handed, wrapped it around his arm. Isaiah pulled, boots digging into mud, and slowly, impossibly slowly, Nate fought his way to the bank. He collapsed on solid ground. Grace still held tight. The baby wasn't breathing. Ruby reached them, hands shaking. Grace. Grace. Nate turned Grace over, pressed her small back. Water poured from her mouth. He pressed again, harder. Grace coughed, sputtered, screamed, the most beautiful sound Ruby had ever heard. Reverend Caldwell dropped to his knees beside them, already speaking. I baptize thee, Grace, child of God, in the name of the Father. Reverend, Nate started. Her life was threatened. I am witness. This is legal. Caldwell's voice shook, but held firm. He scooped water from the flood in his cupped hands, let it drip over Grace's forehead. And of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The crowd had gathered, circling them. Mrs. Holt was crying. Doc Hayes moved forward, checking Grace's breathing, her color. She's all right, he said finally. Cold, shocked, but all right. Vernon Colton stood at the crowd's edge, face white. His lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. Ruby held Grace, finally, legally Grace, and pressed her face against the baby's wet hair. Nate sat in the mud, breathing hard, staring at his hands like he didn't recognize them. You jumped, Ruby whispered. You could have drowned. Couldn't let her go. Simple. Final. Isaiah offered his hand, pulled Nate to his feet. Come on, let's get you all warm before you catch your death. They walked back toward the house. Nate soaked through, Ruby shaking, Grace wailing her fury at the world, and Reverend Caldwell carrying the weight of what he'd just done. Behind them, Vernon watched, calculating. His will was still legal. Grace now had a name, which meant she could inherit, which meant Vernon had more to lose. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But Ruby felt something shift inside her. Grace had a name now, legal, baptized, witnessed by half the town. Her sister existed. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The floodwater rose higher, swallowing the broken boardwalk entirely. By evening, the creek would recede, leaving mud and debris in its wake. But the damage was done, and the truth was about to be tested by fire. Judge Pierce arrived early. The telegram came Thursday morning, arriving Saturday instead of April 15th. Weather window closing, all cases to be heard immediately, 2 weeks early. Ruby's stomach dropped when Nate read it aloud. We're not ready, she whispered. We're never ready. Nate folded the telegram, tucked it in his pocket. But we've got what we've got. Isaiah, you sure about this test? Isaiah nodded, already stoking his forge. Bring me that will. I'll show you fraud in front of God and the judge both. Saturday dawned clear and cold. Real cold, not false spring. The temperature had dropped overnight, freezing the mud solid. Ruby dressed Grace in her warmest clothes, the baby fussing at the confinement. Shh, Ruby whispered. Today you get to be real, legal real. They met at Freeman's Forge at 10 o'clock. Judge Pierce had insisted on neutral ground, and the forge was the only place with space and heat enough for the gathering. The judge himself was older than Ruby expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He stood near the anvil, examining Isaiah's setup with interest. Unorthodox, he observed, but I'll allow it. Frontier justice requires frontier methods. Vernon and his lawyer arrived precisely at 10, both looking confident. Vernon's eyes flicked to Grace in Ruby's arms, then away, dismissive. Your Honor, Lawyer Simmons stepped forward. This hearing is unnecessary.
The law is clear, me.
The law, Pierce interrupted, is what I say it is in this territory, and I say we're going to examine your documents thoroughly before I make any ruling. Mr. Freeman, proceed. Isaiah took Vernon's will with careful hands, laid it on his workbench near the forge. The smell of coal smoke thickened as he worked the bellows, heating a thin iron rod. What I'm going to do, Isaiah explained, voice carrying to everyone present, is test the wax seal's authenticity. Period wax, beeswax mixed with pine resin, what we had access to in 77 and 78, has a high melting point. around 145 degrees. When you heat it slow, it hardens first, then melts. He held up the iron rod, its tip glowing faint red. Modern paraffin wax, commercially available but expensive out here, melts at 99 degrees lower, faster. Judge Pierce leaned closer. And this tells us? Tells us when the document was sealed. If the wax is period accurate, Vernon's telling the truth. If it's modern paraffin, Isaiah's eyes found Vernon's, then this will was sealed recently, last month maybe, not December. Vernon's face stayed carefully neutral, but Ruby saw his hands tighten. Isaiah brought the heated rod close to the wax seal, not touching, just radiating warmth. The seal was red, stamped with Vernon's signet ring. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the seal began to shine. Sweat formed on its surface. Period wax would be hardening now, Isaiah murmured. Getting glossy but firm. The seal started to sag. That's... Lawyer Simmons stepped forward. That doesn't prove... The wax began to drip, slowly at first, then faster, melting down the paper's edge like candle wax. The smell hit Ruby. Petroleum, chemical, wrong. Judge Pierce's expression hardened. Mr. Colton, explain why your supposedly 4-month-old document is sealed with wax that didn't exist in common use in this territory until this year. Vernon's face drained of color. The original seal was damaged. I had to reseal it for transport. You're saying you broke your brother's will seal and replaced it? Pierce's voice went cold. That alone invalidates the document's legal standing. No, I meant... Vernon's composure cracked. The document is real. My brother wanted me to have guardianship. I had to make sure it would hold up in court. By forging the seal. Isaiah's voice was flat, certain. I didn't forge anything. The will is real. Then why modern wax? Pierce demanded. Vernon's mouth opened, closed. Ruby watched him realize the trap, watched him understand he'd been caught. You want the truth? Vernon's voice went harsh, desperate. Fine. My brother owed me money, gambling debts, $400. He promised to repay me with the homestead deed when it proved up, but then he died, and that girl... He pointed at Ruby. She had the only copy, so, yes, I drafted a will that reflected what Samuel promised me. What he would have wanted. What he would have wanted, Judge Pierce cut in, is not the same as what he legally documented. Did your brother sign this will, Mr. Colton? Silence. Did he? He would have, Vernon whispered. If he'd had time, if he'd known... That's not an answer. Pierce turned to Reverend Caldwell. You keep the baptismal records, correct? Do you have documentation of the emergency baptism performed Monday last? Caldwell stepped forward, opened his leather-bound registry. Grace Nathaniel Colton, baptized March 18, 1878, under Doctrine of Necessity, witnessed by... He read off 30 names, including Mayor Pritchard, Doc Hayes, and Mrs. Holt. The child's life was in immediate mortal danger. I performed the sacrament as required by ecclesiastical law. Pierce examined the entry, nodded slowly. Then he turned to Ruby. Miss Colton, you're 12 years old, correct? Yes, sir. Old enough to state your preference. Do you wish to remain with your uncle, or with Mr. Ashford? Ruby's voice came out steady, clear. With Mr. Ashford, sir. He's been good to us. Grace, too. We want to stay. Pierce looked at Grace, now asleep in Ruby's arms despite the noise and heat. The infant appears healthy, well cared for. He turned to Nate. Mr. Ashford, why did you take these children in? Nate stood silent a moment. Ruby held her breath. I met their mother, he said finally. Year ago, Fort Laramie. She was dying of heat stroke. I helped her. She thanked me, said if her baby was a boy, she'd name him after me. He paused. Baby was a girl, but she remembered anyway, wrote it in her diary, wanted the child named Grace Nathaniel, after me. You have proof of this? Ruby pulled the diary page from her pocket, handed it to the judge. Her mother's handwriting, clear and certain. Grace Nathaniel Colton. After the rancher who showed kindness when we had nothing. Pierce read it twice. His expression softened, almost imperceptibly. Mr. Colton, he said finally, your fraudulent will is hereby rejected. Your claim to guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I'm charging you with attempted fraud against the territorial court. Bail is set at $500, payable immediately, or you'll await trial in the territorial jail. Vernon's legs buckled. His lawyer caught him, kept him upright. As for the children, Pierce looked at Nate. Mr. Ashford, I'm granting you full legal guardianship of both Ruby and Grace Colton, effective immediately. You'll need to file formal adoption papers within 60 days, but the children are legally yours as of this moment. Ruby couldn't breathe, couldn't process the words. Nate's face stayed carefully blank, but she saw his hands shake before he fisted them. Furthermore, Pierce pulled another document from his satchel. The 40-acre homestead claim registered to Samuel and Martha Colton is hereby held in trust for Ruby Colton until her 21st birthday. Mr. Ashford, as legal guardian, your appointed trustee. The land cannot be sold, mortgaged, or transferred except by Ruby's consent once she reaches majority. He signed the document with a flourish, handed it to Nate. Court is adjourned. Mr. Colton, you have 1 hour to post bail, or you're coming with me. The forge fell silent, except for the hiss of cooling metal and Grace's soft breathing. Ruby felt tears streaming down her face, didn't care who saw. They'd won. Against law and blood and paper and lies, they'd won. Vernon posted bail. His lawyer paid it. $500 in crisp bills that smelled like Eastern banks and bitter defeat. They left without another word. Vernon's shoulders hunched, like a man carrying more weight than he could bear. Ruby watched them go from the forge doorway, Grace heavy and warm in her arms. He'll go to trial, Isaiah said quietly beside her. Judge Pierce don't forgive fraud. Good, Ruby said, and meant it. The town dispersed slowly, people stopping to shake Nate's hand, to touch Grace's small head like she was something holy. Mrs. Holt approached last, her face pinched with shame. I spoke poorly of you, Mr. Ashford. Said things I shouldn't have. She swallowed hard. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Nate studied her a moment, then tipped his hat. Already forgotten, ma'am. Mrs. Holt's eyes filled. She nodded once and left, her husband trailing behind. Ruby felt something settle in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close. Understanding, maybe. That people made mistakes, that fear made them cruel, that sometimes they found their way back. Come on, Nate said, touching her shoulder. Let's go home. Home. The word felt different now, legal, real. The adoption papers were filed in early April. Judge Pierce handled them personally, bypassing the usual territorial delays. By the time the first wildflowers bloomed in the high meadows, Ruby and Grace Ashford were official, documented, registered, permanent. Ruby ran her fingers over the certificate, unable to stop touching it. Her name, Grace's name, and beneath them both, legal guardian and adoptive father, Nathaniel James Ashford. You gave us your son's name, she said quietly that evening. They sat on the porch, Grace crawling between them, exploring the rough boards with determined hands. Nate watched the baby, his expression soft in a way Ruby had never seen before. Seemed right. James would have liked having sisters. Ruby's throat tightened. She wanted to say something profound, something that matched the weight of what he'd given them, but the words wouldn't come. Grace solved the problem. She pulled herself up using Nate's leg, wobbled on unsteady feet, and reached for his face with sticky hands. Pa, she said clearly. Nate went very still. Did she? Ruby breathed. Did she just? Pa, Grace repeated, patting his cheek with satisfaction. Then she lost her balance and sat down hard, laughing at herself. Nate picked her up, held her close. His eyes were wet. Ruby looked away, giving him privacy with his grief and joy both. 2 weeks later, they rode out to the homestead. The 40 acres that had cost so much, meant so much. The land rolled gentle, good grass, and a creek running clear through the western edge. Samuel and Martha Colton had chosen well. What will you do with it? Ruby asked. Nate surveyed the land with a rancher's eye. Hold it for you, like the judge said. But I'm thinking, if you're willing, we could graze cattle here. Build a line shack, maybe. When you're grown, it'll be yours outright. Good land for starting a family. Ruby tried to imagine it. Herself at 21, the land waiting, a future she could choose. It felt impossible and inevitable, all at once. There. Nate pointed to a small rise near the creek. That's where they're buried. Your parents. Doc Hayes saw to it proper. Headstone. And everything. Ruby's breath caught. She'd known they were dead, had watched her mother die, but somehow she'd never thought about where they rested. They walked to the rise together, Grace riding on Nate's shoulders. 2 simple markers stood side by side, names carved clear, Samuel Colton, Martha Colton. Below Martha's name, someone had added, beloved mother. She remembered kindness. Ruby knelt, touched the cold stone. Mama? Papa? This is Grace, and this— She looked up at Nate. This is Pa. Our Pa now. He's good. You'd like him. The wind carried the smell of sage and warm earth. Spring, finally real and lasting. Nate crouched beside her, Grace still perched on his shoulders. I'll take care of them, he said to the graves. I promise you that. Both of them, for as long as I draw breath. Ruby believed him, believed it bone deep the way she believed in sunrise and seasons in the land itself. That evening, back at the ranch, Ruby hung her mother's locket on a hook by the door, right beside Nate's branding iron and the small anvil Isaiah had given them, a reminder that truth stands up under fire. Hannah made stew for dinner. They ate together at the table. Ruby, Nate, Grace in her high chair, Hannah bustling between stove and table. Family, chosen and fought for and earned. After dinner, Nate taught Ruby to check the horse's hooves for stones. Grace napped in her cradle. Hannah hummed hymns while washing dishes. Ordinary, beautiful, home. Later, Ruby tucked Grace into bed. The bed that had been James Ashford's once, that was Grace's now. The baby fought sleep, fussy with new teeth. Shh, Ruby whispered. You're safe. You're named. You're loved. You're Grace Nathaniel Ashford, and nobody can ever take that away. Grace's eyes drifted closed. Her small hand found Ruby's finger, held tight. Ruby sat beside the cradle until her own eyes grew heavy. Through the window, she could see Nate on the porch, his silhouette dark against the star-filled sky. His spurs hung on their hook beside the door, that distinctive jingle bob pattern she'd recognize anywhere now, the sound of safety, of home. Vernon Colton went to trial in May, was convicted of fraud, sentenced to 2 years territorial prison plus restitution. Ruby felt nothing when she heard. The man was a stranger now, irrelevant to the life she was building. The cattle drive that spring was good. Nate made back his losses and then some. The homestead grass grew thick and green. Grace took her first real steps in June, walking from Ruby's arms into Nate's with fearless determination. And Ruby learned to ride, to rope, to read the weather like a rancher's daughter should. Learned that family wasn't blood or paper or names on a registry. Family was who you'd walk through a blizzard for, who'd jump into floodwater without thinking, who'd carve their heart into legal documents and call it love. Family was choice, made new every morning, paid for in sacrifice, and sealed with fire. Family was home. 20 years on, I still remember the cold. That's what folks don't tell you about Wyoming winters, how the freeze gets inside your bones and stays there, even decades later. I'll be working the south pasture on a summer day, sun hot enough to blister, and I'll catch a scent of coal smoke or hear a train whistle, and suddenly I'm 12 years old again, kneeling on that platform with my baby sister turning blue in my arms. Pa's gone now, passed in his sleep 3 winters back, peacefully, which is more than most ranchers get. Grace and I buried him next to Mom and Papa on the homestead rise, all 4 of them together under the big sky they loved. Grace teaches school in Timber Creek, got herself a husband last spring, good man, blacksmith's apprentice, reminds me of Uncle Isaiah before he passed. She's expecting their first child come October. Says if it's a boy, she'll name him Nathaniel. Says if it's a girl, Ruby. I kept the ranch, kept Pa's brand, the NA he'd used for 50 years, kept his spurs hanging by the door, that jingle bob pattern I'd know in my sleep. Kept his promise to Mama that her daughters would be cared for. Fellow asked me once why Pa took us in. Said it didn't make sense. Widower rancher adopting 2 orphans with no money, no prospects, nothing but trouble on the horizon. I told him what Pa told me years later, when I was old enough to understand. Some debts can't be repaid, only passed forward. Pa had lost his family, we'd lost ours. Somehow in the losing, we found each other. The law said we were orphans. Paper said we didn't exist. But Pa knew better. He knew families got nothing to do with blood, or baptismal registries, or wills written by desperate men. It's who you'd walk through a blizzard for, who'd jump into floodwater without hesitation, who makes the coffee taste better just by sitting across the table. I pour myself a cup now, watch the sun rise over the mountains. Grace's daughter, my niece, sits on the porch step, 5 years old, picking wildflowers for her great-grandparents' graves. Aunt Ruby, she calls. Tell me the story again, about the train station. I settle into Pa's old rocking chair, the wood worn smooth by 3 generations now. The child climbs into my lap, smelling of sage and sunshine and infinite possibility. Well now, I begin, it was the coldest night I ever knew. And I tell her about the blizzard, about the stranger with kind eyes and jingling spurs, about the uncle who tried to steal us, and the blacksmith who proved him wrong, about the judge who saw truth through fire, about how a man named Nathaniel Ashford taught me that the strongest bonds aren't written in law or sealed with wax. They're forged in sacrifice, tested by time, proven through choice made new each morning. The child listens, wide-eyed, the way children do when they sense a story is more than just words, when they understand they're hearing something true and lasting and worth keeping. When I finish, she's quiet a moment, then, "Did you love him? Your pa?" "More than I have words for, sweetheart." She nods, satisfied, and runs off to play. I watch her go, this child who exists because grace existed, because Pa chose mercy over law, love over logic. Some debts can't be repaid, only passed forward, and I reckon that's what family's for.